New York Times reporter David Segal, and panelists Dan Huttenlocher and Ned Staebler.
Hello, and welcome to a conversation about university incubators. It is boom times. I probably don't need to tell anyone in this room that we live in a boom time for university incubators. The more you learn about university incubators, the more you wish that there was a mutual fund that just invested in university incubators, because these are an amazing boom era. But it's not the profits. As far as I can tell, what you want to invest in is not the profits so far, but the construction, because there is an incredible amount of construction surrounding university incubators. And let's talk about today what is driving this, and also whether or not this is good for students. I think this might be a good place to jump off and start, because what we're talking about is a kind of vocational school, a new kind of vocational school for a very unusual vocation of being an entrepreneur. And one of the features of being an entrepreneur is this very high flameout rate. As we all know, for every Uber, there's a couple hundred startups that just flop. So I suppose my first question for both of you guys is, how do you deal with the high flameout rate problem?
Well, I'll start right there by saying I don't see what the problem is. I don't view it as a problem. We talk about getting to know, and we talk about that with a KN and just an NO as well, because we want to do that as fast as possible to figure out if there really is a model and a customer for whatever it is that this company is working on. Because if there isn't one, why waste 2, 3, 5 years working on the problem that's not long-term going to pan out? Why don't we take what we learned, get the entrepreneurs and recycle them back into another project that has the potential to have the high growth, which is what we're really looking for. So we don't view failure as, well, failure. We view it as success.
So at Cornell Tech, we're really not just an incubator, we're also a graduate school. And what we're really looking to do is intertwine much more densely the graduate education that our students get with the abilities to start companies, launch new products within existing companies. And again, failure is a good thing, but not failure in failing out of a program. I'm perfectly happy to have a student drop out of a program in the middle because they started to do something in the real world and start a company. I'm perfectly happy to have a student or an alum have their company fail because you learn a lot from that failure. And so one of the things that's crucial as we're developing our programs, both the academic programs and the incubation programs, is to look at what are the educational objectives, what are the business objectives, how do we bring those together, but also keep them separate where they should be. And in particular, we have sort of one mantra that I constantly repeat to myself and to everybody who's involved in teaching the students at Cornell Tech, which is that our academic programs are about incubating the people. And if you think about incubators, normally they're about incubating companies. And so if you think about incubating the people as the educational mission, incubating companies, businesses, new products as the economic impact mission, and then we look at how do you bring those together effectively.
So has this the flameout problem actually, I think, first surfaced during the first tech boom, which was sort of the late 90s, and anyone who went to college at that time will remember that they had friends who took off to join startups, and many of them, perhaps most of them, maybe the vast majority of them, never went anywhere, and a couple years later they were in law school, bummed about having left in the first place. Have you seen, is that a problem that you guys are trying to address in advance?
So I think in the tech industry in particular, and you'll probably have a different perspective in terms of what you're doing in Detroit, but in the tech industry in particular, if anything, the flameout problem is much more severe now than it was in the dot-com era. And that's because there's been this huge shift that probably started back 20 years ago, which is that the amount of capital to try a new idea out has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. So in some sense, the barrier to entry for trying a new business has gotten less and less, which means more and more new businesses are being tried, which means a higher and higher percentage of them will fail. So if the rule of thumb maybe 10 years ago was that 9 out of 10 startups would fail, it may be that 95 out of 100 will fail today, and maybe 99 out of 100 tomorrow. So this is really just, for people who really want to succeed in this area, they have to be prepared to iterate through a whole lot of startups, learning what they can learn in each one. And some of them, they learn they should have gone to law school, and that's a perfectly good outcome too, and then they should go there.
So TechTown Detroit is a little bit misnamed because half of the businesses that we work with are actually not technology based at all. We'll work with 350 to 400 businesses this year, and 150 to 200 of them will be retail businesses of some sort, or just non-technology, what we would call blocks or place-based businesses. And so it's a little different than the tech space because you don't want to have quite the same flame out rate and iterative process there because of the amount of physical development that you need to make building out a space, et cetera, et cetera. But having said that, in Detroit in general, our efforts in entrepreneurship are largely nascent and aimed at culture change to some extent. We're really trying to let people know that there are alternatives to going to work at Ford's or GM. You don't have to do that. That there are young companies, you can start your own, or you can go and work at one with 5 or 10 or 20 people, and that's a career option that's okay. And that you're likely not going to be working at that company for the next 30 years. It might not be in existence in 5 years. You're going to change 5, 6, 8 times over the course of your career, and that's an okay kind of career path. So we, at the university, put our student entrepreneurship efforts front and center, right where freshmen show up. In the undergraduate library, in the entranceway, is a big office for our Blackstone Launchpad program. It was funded by the Blackstone Charitable Foundation, which introduces students to entrepreneurship from the first moment they get on campus.
Maybe we should back up a moment and just ask a sort of 1,000-yard in the air question. Why do we need incubator programs? And I ask this because I am assuming that both of your institutions of higher learning teach all of the constituent elements that are in your programs. What is the point of braiding them all together in this way?
So entrepreneurship, or actually the way we talk about it at Cornell Tech, is an entrepreneurial mindset. So our students, people in our programs, it's not that they're necessarily going to be founders of businesses. It's more this issue that of having alternative choices that you also mentioned, that usually we think if you're in college or particularly in graduate school, which is our level of program, you think you're going to go take a more stable job. That's what graduate school prepares you for. We want our students to view their own startup, a small company that someone else started, or a traditional career in a bigger company, all as equally likely kinds of things to be doing. And so this entrepreneurial mindset is something that you really learn through doing. You can only learn so much in the classroom. And so when we think about our master's programs, there's a classroom component. There's what we call a studio component, which is the learning through doing, but still with this goal of developing the individual because it's educational. And then there's the, take off the training wheels, get out there and start your own business or get involved in somebody else's early stage business, where again, we still provide support to those companies, but as somebody who myself has spent time as an entrepreneur, making payroll is, that's the kind of thing that really keeps you up at night in a way that very few things do, and you can't learn that in school.
So to take my stab at answering your question, I'm going to back up even further to why TechTown was created in the first place. So initially, we were created to commercialize technology out of the university and Wayne State University and Henry Ford Health Systems, which is a local hospital system. But like a lot of the startups that we work with over the last 15 years, we've pivoted a half dozen times. And the answer to why we do this at all is because we need to, because we have to. The university has a public service mission. We're a public university in the middle of the city of Detroit. And the city of Detroit needs jobs, it needs opportunity, and it needs amenities for residents. So that's why we do a retail boot camp every year. It's why we go out into 6 or 7 different neighborhoods around the city and work with local community development corps to identify entrepreneurs who have recently started businesses or are looking to start businesses, and we work with them on how to start businesses and to grow businesses in those neighborhoods, because we need those kinds of things in and around the city. And so if you look at the three-legged stool that you need for economic impact, I mean, you need money, you need talent, and you need ideas. Plenty of ideas, we're no shortage of those. Money is getting better in terms of the availability of it, but the talent, the people who know how to take an idea and implement it, that's something that's in short supply really everywhere, and that we found a role that we could help develop that. And as a result, the university has a $2.5 billion economic impact every year on the city of Detroit.
Well, that leads to the next, my next question is, does this work? I mean, it seems like there's this new model is emerging. Every university is trying a slightly different version. Both of you gentlemen have very different programs. In terms of proof of concept, what evidence do we have that this actually works? Dan?
So it's a great question. You know, I think the challenge with entrepreneurship, that is the starting of new businesses, is that so many of them fail, and of the ones that succeed, so few of them scale, that you know, it's very hard to do sort of, you know, scientific studies and say we can show that, you know, this particular program, especially programs that haven't been around for decades, have had impact. And that's why I think that for us, again, it's particularly important that we pair this educational objective where we're really helping somebody throughout their career path, regardless of what they do, to have a particular mindset, even if their first and second and third startup companies all fail. But I think the other thing that to me is a real challenge today is it's clear that the whole nature of work, of companies, of value creation is changing very rapidly, probably because of the digitalization of the world, maybe not. And we're not being responsible, I believe, as universities in our broad roles for economic development, for education, if we're not experimenting with things that could help us define what is this future of work, what is. So I don't look at this from the point of view of, you know, is there evidence of success yet today or not? I look at it through the exigencies of the future, which is clearly going to have fairly different kinds of employment, job creation, value creation than we have today.
So we measure lots of things. Some things because our funders make us, some things because we think they're the right things to measure. Sometimes the Venn diagram overlaps a little bit, and we're actually measuring the same things. But, you know, so I could talk about the jobs we've created in the companies we've created and the follow-on funding that those companies have received. But how do you measure opportunity and the thought that people around have opportunity and amenities and they know about it? I mean, I always say that TechTown is where the stereotype of the young white male entrepreneur goes to die. And I say that because half of the entrepreneurs we work with are over the age of 50. 60% of them are not white, and about 52% of them last year were women. So that's a level of sort of opportunity that, other than those numbers I just gave you, I don't know how you measure sort of the intangible, wow, I could have my own business factor that a kid growing up in a neighborhood in Detroit now has because he sees people that look like him and came from where he came from starting businesses.
One of the things that's fascinating is just how widespread this phenomenon has become. Syracuse University has an incubator. Northern Kentucky has an incubator. These are not places that we think of as tech schools. And yet, it seems as though tech is very site-specific. You think about Silicon Valley, for instance. I mean, for years, of course, Detroit, arguably the original Silicon Valley. The fact that you guys are building your operation on Roosevelt Island is really fascinating to me. Can you explain, because that's a long way from Cornell.
It is, yeah. So, I mean, you know, higher education has tended to be fairly site-specific also. You know, there are a few universities that have started to build global footprints, sometimes with some mixed success, frankly. And I think that this entrepreneurial sphere shares a lot with higher education generally. That's why we're doing it in the context of a major university. So those of you who've been to Ithaca, New York, you know, I lived in Ithaca for many years. I often still then and now jokingly refer to it as centrally isolated.
I notice you don't live there anymore.
As opposed, I love Ithaca, actually. I still have a house there.
This is being recorded.
But if you're, that's fine. It's a terrific place. But if you're really trying to do what we're trying to do, which is to bring together technologists, business people, designers, legal minds, right? Today, creating new things involves not just technology people, of which we have tremendous resources in Ithaca. It involves bringing together lots of different kinds of people, some in the university setting, many not in the university setting. And that's something that an urban area like New York is unbeatable for.
But you're on, this is the weird thing, is that you're on Roosevelt Island. I've never been to Roosevelt Island.
You're clearly not a tennis player.
I'm not a tennis player. But you know, I've lived here for like 11 or 12 years. It's a weird thing to say, like, we need this urban setting and then put it in a place that very few New Yorkers have spent a lot of time in. So
my bet, and we can, you know, come up with a dollar amount off stage later, my bet is 10 years from now you won't say that. The F train stops right there, a couple blocks from where we're building the campus. I've started calling the F the tech train because it runs down 6th Avenue here in Manhattan. So, you know, as you look at Flatiron and Chelsea, and then down through the, you know, West and East Villages, and then over through Dumbo and into downtown Brooklyn. And if you draw a map of where the tech companies are in New York, they're along that train. So we're the extension of that tech train. And in fact, it's not just where those companies are now, but it's the extension into Long Island City and that part of Queens, which is undergoing a lot of rapid development now, and a lot of tech companies are actually starting to look at space out there. So I think that from the New Yorker's perspective, Roosevelt Island may look like it's far from things, but if you compare that to, say, Silicon Valley or Seattle, where you get in your car for like half an hour to go anywhere, in fact, it's very dense and very connected, and very much the kind of place that will be an attractor for bringing together those different kinds of talent together with our faculty and students to get new tech businesses. I feel like the pitch is going to be, come here, you'll live on this island, but it'll be easy to get to the place where you want to hang out and collide with people. Well, you know, there is something about being a little bit separate, but you need to have the dense interconnectivity. You know, from here, it's pretty easy to get out to Roosevelt Island. I mean, we're right by the F train, and it's literally 3 stops from here. If anyone who lives in New York, you know that there are lots of places that are easy to get to that you never go to. It's true. And that's why we will be the destination you will come visit. You know, reading about the sheer scale of what is being built on Roosevelt Island, it actually kind of made me think for a moment. The construction of what they have in mind is many, many buildings. It looks like a separate city. And construction is scheduled to end in 2043. Now, Not under my leadership. Many of us will not be here anymore to see this. I was wondering, you know, is it possible that in 2043, tech simply won't have the place of primacy that it now has in our economy, in our imagination? Is it possible we will look at this remarkable structure and think, oh yeah, there was a time when this seemed like a totally sane thing to do? So my question would be, do you look at MIT or Caltech and think that? Or frankly, Cornell's engineering school. I mean, if we look in the sort of mid to late 1800s, the country invested a massive amount of money. In fact, the federal government with the Morrill Land Grant Act, a lot of individual philanthropists started engineering schools for very similar reasons to what we're doing at Cornell Tech today, which is that we were well in the throes of an industrial revolution. Nobody quite knew how to connect university education to what was going on in the economy. All of these things are happening today in the information age. And my view is that this will look as outdated as an MIT or a Caltech.
Before we run out of time, I want Ned to get a crack at that as well. What are your thoughts about what this looks like in 30 years?
I think it'll be completely different, but I can't tell you how it's going to be completely different. And I think that at a time when we're bemoaning the disinvestment in higher education, we should be celebrating this right now, because it is a significant investment. It's a long term, and that's the important thing. You're making a long-term commitment. So many times, state legislators, governors, presidents, whoever it is, you know, they have an initiative and it lasts for 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. And then, well, we throw that out. We don't care about energy anymore. Now we're going to talk IT. We don't care about that anymore. It's advanced manufacturing. And it's really hard once you get going in one direction if you stop and go in another direction to ever make the kind of long-term gains you need. And this needs to be done over 2 generations, not 5 years.
So we've got a little bit of time and some time for some questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm a big fan. I live on the F train, so I'm a big fan of referring it to
The tech train, the tech train.
Because in my household right now it's known as the fecal matter train. So tech train sounds much, much better.
Charles has young children.
Yes.
I just wanted to point
And also rides the F train. I think we actually have a question from Bert Epstein, who's in the audience. And Bert oversees, I'm not sure, oh, there he is. Bert oversees the incubator at UVA, which has taken a slightly different approach. They're looking at, I believe, companies that aren't startups, but are already growing and investing in companies that you know have a track record. Is that right? So do you have a, thanks.
I do not have a question, but I'd be glad to use these 30 seconds to tell you what we're doing at the University of Virginia. The University of Virginia has taken a different approach. We are operating the Jefferson Education Accelerator, which is focused exclusively on education companies and is focused not on incubators or startups, but rather on what we see as the harder and next phase of work, and that is working with the growth stage companies, those that have survived the incubation phase and they've crawled out into the real world and they're starting to make real sales, and they have products that are ready for prime time, and we help them do real academic research to demonstrate that their products and services work. So I think over time, I can make this into a question. Do you think that the incubators will eventually evolve into a whole vertically integrated system that helps companies not only get started, but then go through growing pains, connect more to capital, and do research and continue in that fashion?
If you're doing it right, absolutely. I mean, and we're already moving towards that model to the extent that we can. So we have student acceleration programs and incubator programs. We have non-student, acceleration incubation programs. We have second stage programs. In TechTown, we have a branch of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses Program, which works with folks that are 2 to sort of 10 years old and have 150,000 to 5 million in revenue, and we help them scale. So it's all part of, and then we have collaborations with 2 or 3 other sort of business support entities for different people on the continuum. So we operate in an ecosystem that is fairly well integrated. We partner when necessary pretty well, better than we used to certainly, and because we see it as a sort of a holistic approach to grow businesses across the board.
Would you guys, either of you like to crow about some success stories? I mean, there's a kind of element of a lot of this talk that sounds to a neophyte's ears like Stanford envy, that Stanford did this incredibly well and has reaped remarkable benefits from its alums, and you could reel off, Snapchat, Instagram, Hewlett-Packard, and so on and so on. That seems like a lofty ambition. Are there any specifics where you could say, this is where we're going, this is what we're proud of?
So with Cornell Tech, we're so new, all I can point, literally, we've been operating for 2 years. So what I can point at, I'm very proud of, but it's 2 years, which is that even in that 2 years, we've spun 10 startup companies out. They're all very early stage. They're employing about 75 people already. And so and you have to remember, our student body was teeny. Last year, we graduated 73 students. So if you look at that ratio of new economic activity, I think it's close to unmatched. But, Stanford, a couple of other schools have certainly been very successful over the years. What I would say is very different about the opportunity in New York City compared to the places where tech is really leading now, like the Valley and Seattle to some degree. And it's very much underlies what we're doing at Cornell Tech is we're not so much seduced by the technology itself. What we're seduced by is what we can do with that technology. And I think that aligns much more with New York, with the opportunities in New York, with the fact that we have so many cultural and business and other institutions here. But it also aligns with what's happening in the tech industry today, which is that a lot of the innovation in tech today is not just about tech itself, it's about the interplay of tech and other things. I actually think New York, frankly, I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't believe this. I think that New York is unbelievably well positioned over the next 25 years to really drive a wave of next generation technology growth. Will that supplant the Valley? Doubtful. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to broaden the portfolio of approaches to technology in the United States and around the world. And it comes back to your point earlier that these things are very geographically distinct. So there are things that do well in the Valley. There are things that do well and will do well in New York. And as a country, as we think about economic development, therefore, part of having a portfolio is having a bunch of cities that are doing this each in their own ways.
Is it going to raise my rent? That's what I smell influx of.
That's between you and your landlord. But one of the things I can say about New York versus, say, San Francisco is that any one industry here, no matter how big it gets to be, is such a small percentage of, San Francisco has this problem. There's this huge tech industry in what's actually a very small city. I think it'll be different.
Let me jump in. Does anyone have a question from the audience? Yes. We'll bring down the microphone for you.
Dan, could you discuss the partnership between Cornell and TechTown of Israel
Sure.
in terms of the benefits, which are probably more obvious, and the challenges? And do you feel that that kind of university collaboration is a model for the future in terms of tech and innovation?
Absolutely. So at Cornell Tech, we have an institute called the Jacobs Institute, which is named after Joan and Irwin Jacobs. Irwin was the founder of Qualcomm and ran it for many, many years. And that institute is a 50-50 partnership between two universities in different countries. There are very few partnerships between universities at that level. Harvard and MIT have one called the Broad Institute. They're definitely not in different countries, although it sometimes feels that way. As an MIT alum, I'll say that. But and really what's driving that partnership is if you look at tech is global. If you look at higher education is global. If you look around the world today, there are exactly two countries where technology is a major part of the national economy, and the universities are at the level of here in the United States, and that's the US and Israel. And so there are other countries where tech is great, but the universities are not quite at our level, or vice versa. And so in bringing together TechTown and Cornell in this institute in New York City, we're also really bringing together two of the leading tech economies. We already have several of these startup companies I mentioned, are companies where part of the company is here, part of the company is in Israel. We also have a postdoc who is French, who's doing a company partly in France. But that's not a country, frankly, where tech is a big part of the national economy. So that's something that to us is a really important driver of what we're doing on the campus.
I think we have time for one more question. Many of the questions that came into the iPad focused on this question of whether we're over-romanticizing entrepreneurship, right? David's asked a couple times if there's any success stories, and we don't have a lot of success stories to point at. You both said that most companies fail. This is risky. If you were on the last panel, this would be a little bit like encouraging everyone to become a college athlete in the hopes that they can go on to professional sports. Why should we believe that it's the right thing to romanticize and encourage people to go into what we know is a risky endeavor, particularly if they're coming from a low-income background or a disadvantaged background, and we know that perhaps we should be encouraging them to take more stable jobs. If they're coming from a more privileged elite background, perhaps we should be saying to them that you can learn a lot by working for a corporation before trying to start one on your own.
So my 2 cents, and it'll actually go back to David's question about success stories and whatnot, is that I think what's important to remember is you have to go into this game with the right expectations. If you go into commercializing university technologies with the notion that you're going to create the Valley or you're going to have the next Facebook, whatever, you're going to be sorely disappointed because that is not going to happen. You might as well just buy lottery tickets. You'll probably have the same kind of odds. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It just means you have to understand what you're actually doing. And when we talk about working with entrepreneurs and teaching them about the potential of working in an entrepreneurial environment or being an entrepreneur and starting their own business, I think we're giving them something that will serve them whether or not they work in an entrepreneurial business or they go into a more stable kind of job and become what we call intrapreneurs. And we think they'll be more successful in a bigger corporation as well. And there's nothing wrong, and I think you're more likely to get a job at a big company if you've gone and started your own business for a year or 2 or 4 and failed. Even if you failed, you can always tell a good story when you go for another job and say, I was looking for a more stable environment. I learned great lessons. I can bring them to me here.
That's crazy. Would you ever tell, if it didn't have entrepreneur on it, would you ever tell a student, I think you should go work for Wendy's because I think they're going to go bankrupt, and you'll have a great story to tell.
Working for Wendy's is not the same as starting your own business at all. In fact, it's the opposite of starting your own business because they don't let you think, they don't let you be creative, they don't make you responsible for payroll, product development, customer acquisition, customer discovery, all the skill sets that you will learn that will serve you so well if at some point you decide to go back to corporate America or academia if you want.
So I think a key thing is that the contract that many of us grew up with, implied contract, that you could climb your way up a corporate ladder in a company for your career, has been bankrupt in this country for at least a decade now. And that the sinful thing is to prepare people to go try to climb those corporate ladders in companies that are laying people off without thinking about it, putting people into deadening jobs, telling them not to think.
Yep.
And and that's why we talk about entrepreneurial mindset. It's not just starting a business, it's learning how to think for yourself, it's learning to understand when you're in a dead-end job and you should go work somewhere else because there's a different kind of opportunity. It's not being afraid to be the first mover to take an action. Too many employees sit around terrified that they're going to be fired. Instead, they should be taking initiative.
2009, I worked with so many stable business people with accounting backgrounds and finance backgrounds who came out of Ford and GM and Chrysler that had been there for 20 years or 30 years, and they were so not prepared for the realities of the work world today. As opposed to, I think the kids that are coming out of programs like ours now are going to be ready to take something like 2009 in stride and say, that's okay, I'm going to, I have the skill set to go off and start my own business, do my own thing for 5 years, and maybe I'll transition back if I want to. But that compact is dead, and it was not preparing people for for the work environment we have today.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. That was great. And now.